All right, welcome to the Artist of Motion podcast, people. Episode number 16 is here. Before we get going, I want to mention that I am truly grateful for all of the guests we've had on this show. I get emails and Facebook messages about our guests pretty frequently these days. People are loving hearing about the stories and experiences shared on this show. I'll tell you a story. I had one gentleman who is not a martial artist send me a message through our email account, which is pod@artistofmotion.com, who I've never met. And he buzzed me to tell me that one of our guests inspired him so much to make a change in his life, he quit the job he hated, he moved cities, and he found a job doing something he loves. Then he started dating someone he's over the moon excited about, and he's found a teacher that has inspired him to even train in the martial arts. So he's positively changed his life, relationship, and has found a calling in martial arts training he never knew existed, just because one of our guests said something that clicked for him to make a change. I wanted to share that out there because that story gave me goosebumps when I read it. The entire purpose of this podcast is to provide a positive platform for our modern day legends and warriors to share their stories so that people across the globe can benefit from their wisdom. Alright, let's talk some about this week's episode. Today we're featuring an avid motorcyclist, a student of the martial arts since 1966, and a gentleman with decades of real-world experience putting his training to work as a law enforcement officer. GrandMaster Richard Post joins us today to hear about his training in a couple of different lineages, most notably his long history with the 3 Shields Kenpo style under Joe Dimmick. We were supposed to link up earlier this year, but I came down with the 2018 version of whatever that plague bug is floating around, so we missed that meeting in person. Mr. Post was kind enough to work with me and get this one done by phone. I think you'll enjoy it, so let's get to the interview. All right, welcome to this episode of the Artist of Motion podcast. Today we have GrandMaster Richard Post with us. He started in 1966 in Judo and Jiu-Jitsu, eventually earning a second-degree black belt, and then began training in Kenpo in the 1970s under the Joe Dimmick lineage. Longtime student and the third person promoted to 10th degree black belt into 3 Shields/Sampai Kenpo lineage. He retired from a career in law enforcement and he's now enjoying retirement riding his motorcycles and is an avid Harley-Davidson rider. Welcome to the show today, Mr. Post. How are you, sir?
Well, I appreciate you having me. Thank you for inviting me and look forward to talking to you.
It's going to be fun. I haven't had a bad conversation yet.
Well, there's always a first for everything, so we'll see how that goes.
I don't think it's going to be today. So for those of us playing the home game out there who might be unfamiliar with your history, how about giving us the short version of your martial arts history / anything else you want to throw in there, law enforcement career-wise or anything like that?
Sounds good. Like you said, I started in 1966. It was one of those parks and recreation classes. Parents thought I should know how to defend myself, so they signed me up for it. The class was $5 for 6 months. But one of the stipulations was you needed to have a gi. And at that time, I grew up in Texas, so the only place you could get a gi was they ordered it from Japan, and they were $30. So $5 for 6 months of classes and $30 for a gi, which was pretty expensive back then. So, hats off to my parents for, wanting to instill that kind of confidence and training in my life at an early age. So it was interesting back then. We had no mats, and so we were getting thrown on the floor, and we would choke each other out as part of the class. And, you think about that in those standards today, that's not going to fly. You get parents on the mats all concerned about their kids. Back then, they just sit back and just let it happen. But taught me a lot of things, how to defend myself, and gradually I progressed through the ranks and moved on up and through high school, studying judo and jiu-jitsu. Up to black belt was judo, and then once you got your black belt, jiu-jitsu was the second part of it. So, they taught you to be a little more devastating with joint breaks and things like that. So, really enjoyed it. Had a lot of fun doing it, but what I felt was lacking was I didn't know how to fight with it. It was great. Somebody comes up and grabs you, puts you in a hold or something, you do what you need to do. But as far as actually fighting with it, I always felt that was a weak point. So late 70s, after I graduated from high school, I moved to California to go to college because college was free at that time, junior college. And I moved out here, and I thought, well, if there's a martial arts studio or something that I find, I'm going to jump into that and see what that's all about and start back up again. So as luck would have it, I ran across a studio that was 2 blocks over from where I was living, and it said Shields Kenpo, and underneath it had karate and kung fu. And, you know, kung fu during the 70s was a big draw because there wasn't a lot of kung fu classes. When I grew up in Texas, it was pretty much judo, jiu-jitsu, or taekwondo. So I was excited to see what that was all about. So I got my first introductory class, and the person that was teaching it at the time was one of Mr. Dimmick's brown belts. He was a first brown, which we had the old ranking system: white belt, 4 stripes, brown belt, 3 stripes, and then black belt. And he was a first brown, which is 3 stripes, and he was on a mandatory year weight that we had at that time to get your black belt. But he was one of those students that really excelled, and Mr. Dimmick gave him the permission to open up a studio in Yucca Valley, California. So that's where I started. So I went in and signed up, got my introductory class, and we were going through the motions and participating. And I wasn't real sure at first. This guy that was teaching, I mean, he was really good. He was proficient, but he was one of those little tiny guys. And yeah, I was pretty large in stature at the time. I'm even larger now since I've been eating a lot. But, you know, adding padding, I think that's part of the program. Body armor for my law enforcement career. Anyway, watching him teach, he had a lot of speed, and it was pretty impressive. But during the middle of the class, this individual outside was causing a problem. He had too much to drink and was being a knucklehead. And then he came into the studio, and he was, you know, challenging people and talking a bunch of crap and trying to instill fear and let everybody know that he was this and that and whatnot. So I was really impressed that this brown belt walked over. You know, he must have been about 5'4", 120 pounds, and he locked this guy up in a joint lock, and he escorted him out of the studio. And I was so impressed by that. I thought, wow, this is something I want to do. And I've been a student of Kenpo ever since. So I stayed with him for a couple of years. I got up to my first brown, which was, or third brown, 1 stripe. I always get those backwards. He was going to go to paramedic school, so he had taken me as far as he could. So he introduced me to Mr. Dimmick, and Mr. Dimmick was going to take me on as a student. But it was interesting. There were 2 other Kenpo teachers in the area, but Mr. Dimmick had a special process for students that wanted to come and take classes from him. He had a waiting list of over a year. You had to write him a note or a letter telling him why you wanted to take classes and send it to him. And then he wouldn't respond to you to see what your response would be and how you would react to that. And, you know, that kind of messes with some people. You're thinking, well, should I call? Shouldn't I call? You know, do I send another note? Do I ask what the situation was? So I did the right thing. I wrote him another letter to follow that up with, and he accepted me as a student. So, you know, his whole thing was, I'm only going to teach a specific amount of people. I don't care about anything else, and my major interest is their attitude. So I happened to pass the test with a little encouragement from my previous instructor, and that's how I came to start taking classes with him. And he took me through the brown belt levels, and prior to getting my black belt, I moved to San Diego to continue my college education. And I was kind of concerned how this was going to interfere with my training. So I asked him, you know, how this was going to work. And he said, well, you know, when you come up, give me a call and see if I can fit you into a class. So I had always been really impressed with him and his abilities. And so even going away down to San Diego, where there was a lot of other martial arts schools and opportunities down there, I would still come back on weekends to take classes from him. And I don't know, the mileage, it was about 270 to 175 miles round trip. And I would go back not to get a class, but to be put on a waiting list for a class. So, like I said, there's a lot of opportunities to take martial arts classes down in San Diego, but I saw an opportunity with Mr. Dimmick that he was teaching what I really, really thought was best and beneficial to me. So I stuck with him, and then eventually it paid off, and I got my own private spot, permanent position, and I've been with him ever since, and that's been over 40 years now. So been real happy with that.
That's wonderful. I love hearing stories like that, where you just find something that makes you click and find something that turns you on for learning, and you just stay with it. That's awesome.
Well, I went down to San Diego, and there was a lot of good people down there teaching Kenpo and other martial arts, and I had gone into this one school because I had this brilliant idea that, that they would be happy to have other Kenpo students come in, and then you could exchange ideas, work out together, see differences. And, I thought, wow, everybody's going to be that way. I didn't realize that it doesn't work like that. And maybe I was a little naive because, growing up doing the judo and the jiu-jitsu, that's how it was. You were always welcome in another school to train. So this guy who was the instructor there, I think it would be fair to say that we didn't hit it off real well. I was being very courteous, polite. I was bowing to him and, showing him the total respect he deserved. He was a 4th degree black, I believe, at the time. And we started discussing, and then he was telling me, without ever having seen me do anything, that I was doing everything all wrong, that he was going to have to reteach me, and that we're going to have a patch ripping ceremony where he was going to rip off my patch and replace it with his. And I looked at this guy, and I'm just thinking, man, you fell on your head. You think I'm going to be doing that. So I was respectful. I got up and I bowed to him, and I said, this was a mistake. I'm sorry. I apologize. I just wanted to come in. I didn't want to take classes from you. I just wanted to have some mat time, and I thought that you might have the feet for that. So looking back on that, that was probably a little more insulting and disrespectful. But I thought, well, this guy is starting to get a little aggravated, so I should probably just go ahead and leave. And I remember I bowed down and I said, well, I guess I'm going to leave. And he stood up real quick and he goes, what makes you think you can leave? And I just looked at him and I shook my head. I said, oh, hell no. And I have a temper, so I kind of nutted up, and we had a physical disagreement about whether or not I was going to leave the studio or not. And we ended up, it got physical, and I totally look back and I'm embarrassed and apologize for my attitude that day. But, it left some blood on the wall, and it wasn't mine.
Darn.
So later I ended up working out with one of, not working out, but I worked at a sporting goods store, and one of his students was working there, and we were going back and forth, and he was telling me about this incident that, his instructor's kind of crazy, and that somebody had come in and challenged him, and that he had taken a boken and struck him upside the head, and that's where the blood on the wall came from. And I remember thinking, I don't remember having any blood coming off of me when I left. So, I just kind of smiled and nodded in agreement, said, wow, he does sound kind of like a crazy guy. So that was my lesson. I thought, well, I'm not going to pursue anything further down here with the Kenpo. I'm quite content with, training with Mr. Dimmick, and I don't mind the drive back and forth, even if I'm going to be put on a waiting list or not. So to me, it was worth it. I tried to go another route to get some extra mat time in. That didn't work out. And one thing led to another. And, I'm still with Mr. Dimmick to this day. So everything I do, everything I own, as far as success, abilities and whatnot, I owe it all to Mr. Dimmick. He is truly a grandmaster, in my opinion. And I don't particularly use that word very often. I never heard anybody say or call anybody grandmaster or master until after Mr. Parker passed away. Everybody was always Mr. I always heard him referred to as Mr. Parker, but then again, I wasn't around him very often. But I did have a discussion. I had a private class with Mr. Dimmick one day, and after class, I walked out, and Mr. Parker was sitting in his living room. Mr. Dimmick always had studios at his house, and here's Mr. Parker sitting on the couch, and I was, wow, I was all blown away that he was sitting there. And I thought, how awesome was that not only was he there, but he didn't interrupt my class, which I would have thought, Mr. Parker, hey, come on in, I'm not going to debate you coming into my class. But he was patient, waited till I was through, and then he was very nice. And of course, I'm bound to everybody. I'm bound to Mr. Parker. I'm just thrilled to be there. And he would come up to Mr. Dimmick's house a lot. He was going to put out a video series on Kenpo, and he was talking to Mr. Dimmick a lot about video editing and things and what kind of machines and stuff to use, and advice about how to put it together, because he had something pretty special that he was working on. So that's how I got to see Mr. Parker. And I never had physical time on the mat with Mr. Parker, but I did get to speak to him a lot and have conversations with him at the internationals. It was kind of weird. I told you I'd never heard of Kenpo when I first came to California. And all of a sudden I'm hearing about Kenpo and Mr. Parker and the international. So I thought I would go down and check it for myself. And the first time I saw Mr. Parker, it was kind of hilarious because, he was sprawled out in the between two rows of chairs. He was kind of just laying back, and he had a bowl of nachos on his stomach. And he was just eating the nachos. And then when he got done, he took a nap. I was thinking, wow, that's not the image I had of Mr. Parker, and it was kind of funny. But later that night, he did a demonstration on stage, and my jaw hit the ground. I was just blown away and couldn't believe how fast that man moved and how much power he could generate. And, you could almost feel a whirlwind around him as he would do things. So that was my first impression of Mr. Parker. And then later, before I started taking classes from Mr. Dimmick, I went to the internationals again, and Mr. Parker invited Mr. Dimmick to get up on stage and do a demonstration. That was in 1981, I believe. And there's a nice little video clip you can see of it on YouTube. And I was just blown away with Mr. Dimmick and his abilities. And then later I was fortunate enough to become a student. So I guess it works out the way it's supposed to.
That's great. And then, so we were talking before we got on air here, you were also, as part of your history in the martial arts, you were affiliated with Dave Hebler's organization too, right?
Yeah, later on, I met Dave Hebler through another friend of mine that I was teaching. He was a friend and a student. And I was asked to be part of Dave Hebler's organization. And I thought, well, that's kind of nice. We get to go around and be on testing boards and see what's going on and meet a lot of people in the Kenpo community. And I was a national director for Dave Hebler for his original American Kenpo Karate Association, and also his Protecting Women organization for 20 years. He wrote a book, How to Survive Encounters of the Worst Kind. And I was fortunate enough that he, privileged and honored that he asked me to write a chapter in his book. It was a condensed version of a book that I had written about my experiences in the prison system in California and other experiences through martial arts. So I did like a abbreviated chapter for him to kind of touch upon some highlights of things I learned from inmates and, how to defend yourself with predators and, things like that. So, it is a great honor to be, thought of well enough that people would want you to do something like that. So, yeah, I just, sure. So if you ever want to check that out, that's available through his organization.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm hoping Dave and I have been kind of playing Facebook message tag back and forth for the last couple of months. We're hopefully going to nail down a date he can be on our podcast soon too. So right on.
Yeah, he's fun to talk to. He's got a lot of good stories about Elvis.
Yeah, and he's been around in Kenpo since the late 50s too. So there's not a whole lot of that crowd left. So the more of those guys we can get talked to and hear their stories, it's so much the better.
It was kind of nice. I've gone to some events, and Dave Hedler and Mr. Dimmick were all there together, and it was kind of nice to hear Dave call Mr. Dimmick his senior. And I thought, wow, that's something you don't really hear a lot of those people that are classified as seniors say, this guy is my senior. So,
yep. Really cool stuff. So, you mentioned the law enforcement. I don't want to ask about anything that may be confidential or might reveal information that's not a good idea to reveal. But how did your law enforcement career dovetail in with your martial arts career?
Well, everything I've always done has always been affiliated or associated with martial arts. I always wanted to have jobs and things that I could learn something from about how to deal with people. I mean, you can get a basic job in retail and dealing with the public because you're always going to have different personalities and whatnot. A lot of people say a punch is a punch, a kick is a kick, which might be true, but it's a different mentality when you're being attacked by a drunk accountant who's had, too many drinks, versus the biggest serial killer in the Southwest. There's consequences if you lose. So, that always played into it. But I tried being my law enforcement career. I started with the CHP and was injured, and I left that. And I had to get into find a job temporarily until I could find something else. So I went to work at a department store maid company as a loss prevention manager, and realized I didn't want to do that the rest of my life. So, I found the California Department of Corrections was hiring, and they were paying pretty well, considering, being a glorified babysitter. So I thought, well, I'll give it a whirl. So I got into that, and I think that was something that really let me experience what my abilities were and what it was like to be around people, of that caliber of predator, to see how you respond. I mean, in class, you're always saying, oh, well, a guy throws a punch. Well, now you're saying, okay, well, now this mass murderer is throwing a punch at you. How are you going to respond? What's the difference it's going to be? And it was a very, very brutal environment that I got associated in. And it's not like, well, I'm an officer that they respect you. You have to earn the respect, and it's not something that you will always have. It's something that you have to go in there daily. So just like the inmates, walk the line every day, and I have to do what I need to do to get out of there, because you never know when it's coming your way. They'll send them at you to check you out to see how you're going to respond in a situation. So when it gets serious, they know what to expect from you. And probably one of the biggest lessons that I learned is never, ever be predictable. And, they're very fond of that. They want to see what you're going to do. And if you keep changing up on them, they hate that. So I happen to be pretty good. We had the presets of being fair, firm, and consistent. I added, be unpredictable to that. But, I've probably been involved in over 50 riots personally, been included in it, participated in it, and he'll try to get out of it. My whole studies and, interest in Kenpo and martial arts have always been mass attacks and weapons defense. And, best thing I can say to anybody is never, ever be unarmed. They talk about, all this empty hand stuff that they're doing, but, I'm not going to do a Kenpo mini form on somebody to try to get through the day. I'm going to go to weapons first, and that's outside the prison as well as inside the prison. So anything that you can use as a weapon, anything that you can use to your advantage, of course, as you use it correctly as the department dictates, so you don't get into any kind of trouble. But it was an experience, because you never know what you're going to deal with or what you're going to see. But it was a great learning experience. Did you have any specific questions about it, or?
That was just more just the brief overview type thing. So I won't get into some specifics here, referring to multiple different parts of the training. But the thing that I triggered right this particular second was, so how do you compare the mental discipline that you have to go into that kind of environment every day with the mental discipline it takes to keep going back into, basically martial arts training is, most people start out with, they're getting their butts kicked every day. Eventually you learn how to kick butt yourself, but for a while you're just taking punishment from, at least in that time period, you're taking punishment to try to help yourself learn how to not take punishment, right?
Well, you're in there and you have to realize that the consequences are the biggest thing. It's like, okay, I beat this guy down, that was trying to hurt me, but hey, this guy's affiliated with this gang. And now all of a sudden, because of that, if you did it inappropriately or unnecessarily, overemphasize the brutality of it, they can reach out and they can get you, or they'll come at you, constantly, or you'll continuously have problems with them. And, their reach is far beyond the prison. They can come out and get you on the street if they think that you're being totally disrespectful to them. So, you can't just go in there and beat them down, because first of all, they've been beaten down their whole lives. And, what you have to do is you have to psychologically defeat them. And, that's something that you have to do just by being around them. What scares them and what motivates them. But the biggest part on your end of it is you got to know what your limitations are. I mean, you see somebody gouging eyeballs out or cutting people's eyes out. How do you deal with somebody like that? How are you going to fight somebody like that unless you're willing to rise to that level specifically? You have to kind of become what scares you, because it's really amazing that they have ability to know what scares you, what your fears are. And, growing up, I've had some traumatic experiences, and now all of a sudden I'm around these people that are capable of doing the same thing over again. So are you a prey among predators, or are you a predator among predators? So you at least have to rise to their level. You have to be able to go to that level in an extreme situation if necessary. And if you're not, you need to have alternate plans. And, that was the biggest thing I ever learned. It's psychological. It's not just a physical attack. It's psychological, because you're going to have to deal with that long after. People say, well, I can do this many strikes in this many seconds, but, the encounter is going to last a lot longer than a few seconds. I have PTSD for some of the stuff that I've been involved in, and that's something I have to deal with. But it is what it is, as they say. One of the first things I saw, was really horrible. But this inmate was sitting out on the yard by himself. He was reading a book, and two other inmates approached him for whatever reason, and one of them just did a nice, beautiful roundhouse kick to the guy's face and ended up breaking his zygomatic and maxillary bone. I believe it's called, the order around the eye, the cheekbone there. The guy's eye popped out. I don't know about you, but I would think, wow, that would cause me a lot of concern. I would start feeling sorry for myself. I don't want to play anymore and don't want to participate. But boy, this guy just got to his basic primitive instincts. And it was the most awe-inspiring, savage, brutal, instinctive act of survival that I've ever seen. He got up and he dropped the first guy. He just picked him up and slammed him into the ground and broke his neck. And then he grabbed the other guy and he was just beating the tar out of him. I mean, he was smashing his skull in. And, you know, I'm running from across the yard, and I'm witnessing this as I'm coming across. And I was just thinking, wow, that was the most interesting, impressive, sick thing I've ever seen in my life.
I don't remember that throw from judo or jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, and just as I got there, the guy's head exploded because the guy in the tower realized it was life-threatening, and he popped off around and blew the guy's head off. So, you know, now all of a sudden you're thinking, hey, kid, you want to see something that's going to stick with you the rest of your life?
Right.
But it's in, like I said, the context and the terms that it happens is just so out there. I mean, you don't learn this stuff in the normal classroom situations, but that was what was beautiful about learning things from Mr. Dimmick. You know, I could ask him anything. I could show him that. And once you explain what's going on, I mean, he could help you maneuver, and he can help you learn things, and he can help you be spontaneous and visualize things ahead of time. So, you know, everything I did wasn't on my own. I learned it from Mr. Dimmick, but, you know, one day I had an inmate that was going to set me on fire. And I was thinking, you know, we don't learn this stuff in technique lines. You know, it's like, what category completion is this going to
Yeah, how do you defend against fire?
Yeah, so it's like, but you get down to your primitive instincts, and, you know, people always say, well, sophisticated basics, but, you know, when you get down to that instinctive survival mode, you know, there's nothing more than that. And you have to be able to change up. You have to be able to adapt to the situation, and you know, excuse my language, but you have to really be able to pull something out of your ass that you didn't think you were going to be able to ever, you know, have to do or even considered or contemplated doing that. So, you know, I've been fortunate. I've been able to get through situations that most people would probably freeze up. And, you know, it's like, I think Shakespeare's experience is the teacher of all things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you can learn from that, and, you know, it's like, okay, people, I just keep going over and over the situation. How could I have done it different? what you know, except for avoidance, how could I have kept this from happening? You know, and it's not just physical skills. You know, you have to have a mental strategy when you go in there, and you also have to have verbal skills. You know, you have to be able to distract them and talk to them, and, you know, basically talk shit to them, you know, for lack of a better term. You know, they're prisoners that can handle it. So, but it also goes the other route too, that I've also had inmates save my life. So it goes back and forth. It's a mutual respect thing. And it's like, it's not that I'm showing them favoritism or something. I'm being fair, firm, and consistent with them. And they like structure. They like to be in that kind of environment. And, you know, it helps in the long term because it kind of gives you, you know, a path that you can go down, but you have to be able to deviate from that path in an instant. My whole thing is always, I mentioned earlier about learning mass attacks and weapons defenses and disarms, and I've always had kind of a knack for that. But when I worked at May Company, it was kind of interesting. Had these little wannabe gang members. There were 7. They wanted to come in, and they were shoplifting, and then they would go off and, you know, try and distract you or run interference for you while their buddies got away. So I was with my boss at the time, and he was a former LAPD officer, and we had gone outside and we pursued him out, and, you know, the guy confronts him, and he throws his chest out there like he still has a badge on there, and guy punches him and takes him out with one punch, and I'm just thinking, oh shit.
That wasn't too bright.
Yeah, you know, they're 15, 16-year-old kids, which isn't a problem, 1-on-1, 2-on-1, you know, not a big deal. But when you get 7-on-1, it's like a pack of wild dogs, right?
Mm-hmm. And they don't quite have the maturity to understand what real injuries are either.
Yeah, so I started doing my thing, and, yeah, I was going kind of easy at first, and then as it progressed, it's one of those moments in your training that you've always heard about, but all of a sudden it just poof, you know, it happens that the guy was behind me, and I knew that he was coming at me with a knife, and he was going to take out one of my kidneys. I could feel his intent. So I ended up doing, we call them thunder techniques instead of rod techniques, but I did the first part of breaking the thunder on him and disarmed him. And then I don't know about you, but when somebody tries to stab me, I take that shit personally.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, I'm going to make an example of this fool. So I lit his ass up, and I remember he left a big blood stain as he slid down the glass window on the door. But it was interesting because, everything happened, the way it was supposed to. It did what it was supposed to do. But a couple of weeks later, his grandmother came in to talk to me. And I was thinking, oh, wow, man, this is going to escalate and this is going to turn out bad. And, and she waved her finger at me to come in closer to her. And I thought she was going to slap or punch me in the face. But she hugged me and she kissed me on the cheek and she thanked me for doing that to her grandson. And I was kind of stunned at first, like, why are you thanking me? And say, he was going down that wrong path. He was going to, doing gang violence and whatever. And I was having nightmares about you. So I was kind of like, wow, what do you say to something like that? So,
well, you think about it, you made a positive impact on somebody. Negative means of doing so, but positive, outcome. So,
yeah. So it was kind of one of those rare moments. About a year later, I read in the paper, two of the guys that were part of that group that I had gone easy on were killed in some other gang violence. And, one of the persons, just sat down. They didn't want to participate. And then, I kind of escalated the force until I got to him. They just terrified him when they saw me open up like that. But it was interesting because about a year after all of this guy shows up again that I had really tagged. And I guess he wanted a rematch. And I was pretty surprised at how big this boy got in a year. It's like, man, he's been working out. He had some muscles on him, and he probably put on about 50 pounds, and I was going to go, okay, this is going to be kind of interesting. So I walked up to him, and I smiled at him, and I just looking at him and grinning, just, you looking for me? And he had that mean look on his face, and I just kept looking at him, and next thing I know, I just noticed his body started trembling and vibrating, and all of a sudden I looked down, I noticed he's standing in a puddle of his own piss.
Maybe not.
Yeah, so that was the last time I saw him, but it was weird. 10, 15 years later, I see him on the news, and he's a minister now, and he's preaching the evils of being members of gangs, and he works with youth.
I love hearing turnaround stories like that.
And I was thinking, well, I never really considered him a student, but I guess I schooled the young man. So anyway, that was my thing. It's like, okay, I've prepared for mass attacks, in that situation. And, everything from now on, it's going to be biscuits and gravy. So when I got into the prison system, one fine day, we were short-staffed, and they decided to run full program, which is usually over 800 inmates on the yard. And I'm the only dumbass out there wearing green.
Yeah, what could go wrong with that?
Yeah, I know. So I protested. I mean, I don't want people to think, wow, you're a total idiot for doing that. I mean, I protested. I said, this is dumb. I'm not going to go out there. And so, they basically threatened me, with retaliation, writing me up or whatever, but I didn't. So, I went out there, and sure as shit, it teed off, and, full-blown riot, and here I am just standing there with my ass saying, I'm going to die.
Yeah, what are you going to do with 800 inmates out there, and you're the only dude wearing green on the floor? And this ain't going to go good.
But then what the heck am I going to do? So anyway, I'm running, for the gate, trying to get out, and I'm engaging people right and left. So, my strategy with the 3 shields that Mr. Dimmick always developed was, be mobile, agile, and hostile. And that's what I was doing. And I was having some good success with that. And then I come across an inmate that pretty much had been disemboweled, and he's sitting there trying to hold his intestines in.
Oof.
And so I think, well, I can get off the yard, or I can do the right thing, and my conscience got the better of me. So I stand over him. I have my side handle baton that we were using at the time, and I took off my shirt, and I'm trying to help him keep his intestines in. And, other inmates are coming up, and they're trying to get to him to finish him off. And then I'm standing there, and they're trying to come at me. So I'm doing my thing. And I was thinking, man, I don't see how this can get any worse. I remember thinking that. And next thing I know, I felt my leg go out from under me. So I got shot. So I go, well, so much for solid stances, right? I'm not going to be able to be in a solid stance. And that Daniel San crane technique's not going to work in this situation.
Wait a minute. When you said got shot, does that mean like friendly fire, or does that mean somebody shot the leg on you?
Yeah, friendly fire. I got hit with it. And it turned out, it was a ricochet. Whatever. So I had been hit prior to that with the rubber rounds. I was getting peppered in the back with those, and everything was just kind of turning the shit and rolling downhill.
No and kidding. Jeez.
Yeah, and then they decided that they're going to deploy the CS gas. I don't know.
Well, you're already on the ground?
I get back up, and I'm still doing my thing, and then all of a sudden, I don't know if you've been the military grade CS gas, but not only does it burn, but it takes your vision away and makes you feel like you're suffocating.
Yeah, I have declined the one opportunity that I had to try to do that. I took the taser, but I'm not willing to take the gas. No thanks.
Yeah, so that's it feels like you're suffocating. Even though you're breathing, it feels like you're not. It just whatever. We have CN and CS gas, and we call it cry now, cry sooner. So I read some really, really horrible stuff, but anyway, that takes my vision away. So
now you're shot in the leg, trying to deal with somebody who's been disemboweled, and now you can't see. Great.
Yeah, so it kind of, it wasn't the best of days, but we had talked about in the early days, what did you do for training and whatever, and we always used to get spiritual. You go up to Idlewild and, maybe partake in some herbage or, some alcohol to, free your mind so your ass will follow. And we used to do this thing, we called it master Poe drills, where you blindfold yourself and you go take off running through the woods and see who was the one that hit the tree first, So it was like a stupid training exercise we used to do, because back then, the martial arts was mystical, and we always wanted to be like, Kung Fu at the Shaolin Temple and Master Po. He can do things blind, and but it basically just turned out to a laugh fest. You'd be hearing somebody run and fly, and hear him run into a tree. But it was things like that. It's like I never knew how that was going to benefit me. So here I am, right in the middle of all this carnage, and I can't see. And I took out a lot of people that day, including 2 officers that came up behind me. They to tell me that they were coming out. I felt really bad about this, And,
but by the same token, if you're in the middle of carnage and they don't announce that we're friendlies, come on.
Yeah, and then of course, afterwards, it's my fault for being out there, and it was like, well, I was ordered to be out there, and then I was racist because I was hit a disproportionate number of one race over another, and then I hit the officers, so they were going to send me to remedial baton training, and it's things. I understand legalities and whatever, but it was one of those situations that just kind of changed my perspective on everything.
I completely believe that.
I used to be that guy that, no, this is the way you do it. It's rigid. There's no variables to it. You do it this way. Your stances have to be this way. After that, I couldn't do it anymore. And I can't do anything that I couldn't use. I don't waste my time doing things. Like I don't care if I ever do finger set again, and people are going to jump on, well, you don't know the hidden moves and you don't know the way Mr. Parker. Well, good for Mr. Parker and good for all those people out there. This is just my personal opinion. I'm happy for you. You keep doing things you want, but you get double shifts, working 36 hours with the drive, and then you get off and you got to come back in and repeat. You're not going to have a lot of time to work on everything. So maybe my skill levels have kind of dropped. Can you do Form 6? Well, do I really need to?
Yeah, I mean, and no disrespect to anybody else out there, but you get to 10th degree black, 9th degree black. I mean, why? What right does anybody have to tell you that you should be doing this or you should be doing that? At that point, you kind of make your own decisions for yourself, right?
Well, that's how I looked at it, and my whole thing is what works, what doesn't work, and it's hard to say, well, you need to practice more, you need to do this. Well, it's kind of hard to practice when it's every day. Mm-hmm. You go out there, after all, these are the people that we are defending ourselves against, muggers, rapists, serial killers, all that good stuff, right?
And they're all in one place for you. Imagine that.
Yeah. So try to feel intent, with a whole group of people that want to kill you. It's kind of a learning experience, but you still get your critics. But I had an analogy. I know Mr. Parker was always fond of analogies, but mine was like I related learning martial arts to learning about sex. Would you like to hear it?
Sure.
It's like you can take the virgins on the school playground, who lie about their experiences. You can ask one of those knowledgeable teachers with all those titles, degrees, and letters after their names who use proper wording, terminology, and terminology. And their lectures are basically so dry that you have to use a lube to keep from chafing. You can read a book on the subject or watch a DVD and practice by yourself. Or if all else fails, if you hang out in a bar long enough, it's bound to happen. So I'm a big proponent of Kenpo field trips. So if you want to learn how to do something, go to where the action is and figure it out for yourself.
I think that applies to just about anything in life. There's absolutely no substitute for experience.
Well, that's the big thing. People see things from one side, they have an opinion. When they see things from all possible sides, they have perspective. But in the end, nothing beats the experience. They say, well, what's the best martial arts that you could do? What do you think about this? And, they all have some value, but if you're serious about learning a particular martial art, I'd suggest finding one that's, in use condition so that there's no misunderstandings about what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, it's, what's your goal? If your goal is that you want to get in good shape and you want to compete in tournaments, then find an art that's geared towards that. Your goal is you want to find something that's going to keep you alive, find something that people who are doing the gig that you want to be doing have been practicing themselves.
I admire those people that are tournament grand champions or whatever. I always wanted to do that. I love going to the internationals. I take notes. I'd see somebody do a specific freestyle move or whatever I like. I'd write it down. I'd see self-defense stuff I haven't had yet. I'd take notes. And that was the internationals of the old days. And it was just so awesome to go there and watch. And then, I never really participated. A lot of my classes with Mr. Dimmick were freestyle or, private classes. And my freestyle time was I freestyle him. And so, I never knew how good I was doing because I was never, ever going to do as good as Mr. Dimmick does. I mean, that guy is just phenomenal. He's so impressive. It's just amazing. But I always wanted to, be grand champion. I had those fantasies and had a girlfriend at the time that wanted to go into tournaments. She was a lower belt. So, I went with her and Mr. Dimmick put together a tournament team to start back out to see how we do. And, went into the first tournament, and it was the state championships in Santa Ana when it saw Kaliwalu. I hope I didn't mispronounce his last name. One of his tournaments, and they were always notable. Orange County, everybody would turn up from everywhere to compete in those things. And I'm not saying anything about my abilities or skills, but the division that I was in had 30 competitors in. And I ended up taking second place in my first tournament. That was in the black belt division. That was the black belt heavyweight. So I don't say that's my skills or abilities. That's what Mr. Dimmick taught me. And he has a long list of champions that he's developed over the years, and his sparring ability is unsurpassed by none. I've seen a lot of Kenpo martial artists out there, and my opinion of him, he's just so impressive. He's the fastest, strongest, most powerful I've ever seen or been around. And that might sound biased because I've been with him all these years, but that's my opinion, and I stand by it.
There's something to be said for loyalty to your instructor too. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, he is always, it doesn't matter what I come with him, what question I ask, what can I do here? What can I do there? He always knows the answer. And, it's like, how do you do that? He's just light years above, what I've seen. He promoted me to 10th black, but he's light years ahead of me. I'm just always in awe when I go to train with him. Everything that I've accomplished, done, or been successful at, including saving my life, I owe it all to him. And, my philosophy of when I first came there was, from the judo and jiu-jitsu, was, hey, we get in a fight, and I kind of throw my shoulder out there, and it's like, grab me so I can throw you. I wanted to learn how to fight, and with Kenpo, and he's the one that taught me how. So I learned from the best, in my opinion.
That's awesome. Okay.
So I ramble on.
No, you gave me a great segue to our next topic. So how about telling us about, what were those training classes with Mr. Dimmick like? What did you guys do? Every school I've been to has, didn't matter if it was a different teacher in the same school. Every class is a little bit different. So, like I mentioned earlier, there's not a whole lot of information out there about Mr. Dimmick and, what training with him was like, short of people like Howard Singer gave us a little bit on his podcast appearance. And, anybody I get the chance to talk to, I always like to ask, what were those classes like? What were the focus of classes? And, how did the breakdown of how many minutes did you spend on this and how many minutes did you spend on that? What was that like?
Well, we didn't need to waste time with the basics of square horses and stuff, only at the earlier belt levels. But once you get to the black belt range, it was more about freestyle concepts, strategies, approach, fakes, counters. You have your basic three types of fighters: your sitters, your attackers, and the ones that are counter fighters. So it's basically built off that kind of thing. The concept of the three shields is from a freestyle approach, and most people, you hear freestyle, you think point fighting or tournament fighting. It's free to use your style. You're going to use your special natural weapons. You use your hands as shields, feet as shields. You block certain specific areas as in unison with each other or independently, like all of a sudden, hey, somebody shoots you in the leg, you can't use that anymore, so what are you going to do? So you're able to cover and incorporate other aspects. You can either go from a self-defense technique into the freestyle mode, or freestyle into what he has now is called like a connectors program that we do for the upper ranks. And what it basically is, I used to call them 20-foot drills, where he would give you 2 or 3 short movements and then another few, whatever, and you can interconnect them and place them in any order, and then you have that geometric progression about how you can use them. And we would just go up and down. I would be offensive, and he would go back using his 3 shields. And then he would come at me, and I would go back. And then every now and then somebody would make a mistake, and they'd go off into another strike, and then you'd automatically, what you're doing, we're able to deflect it and then go back and regain the initiative. A lot of people in Kenpo, when they do techniques, and Kenpo, in my opinion, is a technique-based art. Would you say that, or a system?
I think the vast majority of the Kenpo lineages are, yes.
So I was always taught that techniques are your last lines of defense. Here it is. They've come through all of your zones and ranges, and they've laid hands on you, you do the technique. Well, like I said, that was always our last line of defense, not our first. Our first was always being in a fighting mode. So you can't always be in a fighting mode. You know, you're at a party, you're trying to contain yourself, but, you know, if you see a problem arising, some guy comes in from across the room, you know, he's coming at you, you're going to start getting in your position, you're going to start rearranging your stances, you're going to start moving, you know, mobile. And then you're not going to say, well, I'm just going to stand there and throw 5 swords at somebody. You know, some people might be able to do that. I personally don't. I'm going to get into the freestyle mode, use my 3 shields, and then go off into these connector concepts. But, you know, people say, well, you know, 5 swords works and this and that. And I'm not telling anybody what to do. Again, anything I've said or mentioned today is my own personal opinion of how I've done things and what it's worked for me. And I've shared, you know, the information freely. If you want to use it, great. If not, you know, that's fine. That's why I quit going on forums. You know, I get tired of arguing the same point over and over again. It doesn't really matter to me. But let's say Mr. Parker, you know, if he was still alive and you were with him, I would probably say 5 swords would be one of his favorite techniques. Would you agree with that?
That seems to be a lot of people in Kenpo's favorite technique.
Okay, so let's say Mr. Parker gets pissed off at me and all of a sudden he throws a punch at me. Do you think honestly that I'm going to be able to pull off 5 swords on Mr. Parker?
Having not met Mr. Parker myself, but hearing the rumors of him, probably not.
Yeah, so, you know, you got something that's your favorite technique, and this is how I personally develop my techniques is I reverse engineer them. I try to figure out how to defeat the technique. How can you take it apart? And, you know, I've shown people, well, you know, if you do this to me on 5 swords, I'm going to break your arm. You do this, I'm going to break the other arm. And then they say, well, you're not going to do that because, okay. Again, I'm not here to argue with you. I'm just trying to make a point out. And, you know, people don't respond to that, or they don't really like to hear that. It's their comfort zone, their comfort blanket. And, hey, 5 swords has worked for me, and it's always going to work. But you go on YouTube, anybody can go up there, pull a 5 sword and see what the technique is. You know, it's kind of like, in my opinion, in football, you know, giving the other team your plays. If you're so good and you're so adept at, you know, performing the plays the way they're supposed to in the playbook, why not give the playbook to your opposing team? What difference was it going to make? But you do have that ability, you know, to audible off if you're on the offense. You can argue, well, the defense can score points too, but yeah, that's true only when the offense makes a mistake. But you can audible off, you can change plays up, you can run different routes, you can confuse them. So yeah, you're more likely when you're offensive to be able to score points or to, or whatever the case may be, than if you're just always defensive. So the way 3 shields work is we try to regain the initiative so we can become offensive again. And it's kind of hard for somebody to think about hurting you, killing you, wanting to knock your lights out when you're just right on top of multiple attacks, you know, to their vital zones and whatever. They're going to have to deal with that. So now all of a sudden their attitude changes from attacking to now they're having to defend. So that's the whole thing we're moving forward. You know, a lot of the Kenpo techniques, you have to stay in the zone. You have to stand there. You have to be in this stance, and you have to wait for your opponent or move them into this position so you can continue on. The 3 shields approach, you know, it's basically, you know, we're a lawnmower and you're a blade of grass, and we're just going to mow you down. And, you know, that's kind of putting it bluntly. And it's a little more finesse than that, but I'm not waiting for anybody. If somebody throws an arm up the block, hey, guess what? That's the target. It's not your face. I'm going to break your arm. You know, or I'm going to break your leg. I'm going to, whatever you put out there, that's the target. And then I'm just going to gradually just try and take it away from you. But people argue, well, you can't do this and you can't do that. And it's like, well, okay, thank you for your opinion. I appreciate it, but that's my belief system. And I'm not a used car salesman. I'm not trying to sell anybody anything. I actually give it away from free. You want to just ask, and I'll tell you. And you know, that's how I learn. having conversations with people, I try to emulate them. They told me, hey, this worked. And it's like, I didn't care what rank you are. I'm not stuck on the fact that, you're this, that, or whatever rank. If you're a white belt, a lot of people have different experiences. And, what you've been through, you might consider to be horrendous or graphic, or, you can't function anymore in life. You have PTSD because it's so bad. But, there's people out there that have been through a lot worse, and have a lot more experiences. I would prefer to have somebody, coming back from a war zone telling me how do you survive in combat, than telling me how, to deal with that drunk accountant in a bar that's throwing a punch at me. So that's just my opinion. I have a lot of them.
No, it seems like it's a well thought out one based on everything you've been through in your life. So,
well, people tell you, okay, well, you're this, that, or, you have a title, or you're GrandMaster or Master, whatever. I prefer Richard. I'm approachable. If you want to talk to me, I let people choose what they wish to talk to me, or call me and whatever. But whatever it is that you come up with, it's something that needs to be spontaneous and it needs to be doable. And, wrong time to find out something that doesn't work is right in the middle of, trying to save your life because somebody takes it seriously, and you're trying to counter it. And that's how it is. I don't go by titles. I remember seeing Muhammad Ali, trying to take karate, and he's in a neutral bow, and he's wearing a white gi and a white belt. And I just thought, wow, how unnatural is that? You take somebody who's probably one of the best fighters in the world, and you're limited him to what his responses are. You got to be able to improvise, adapt, overcome, mobile, agile, hostile. I just, and at work, I just can't do anything in a solid stance. I know Mr. Parker used to always say, well, the highest levels you can attain is the gaseous state of Kenpo. Now we know that there's plasma, there's a fourth level, but, how do you become gaseous if you're in a solid stance? And, there's some valuable questions that you can ask yourself when you just start to analyze things. To make some really awesome comments or the coolest things, like somebody would challenge them and say, hey, let's meet in a phone booth at 6:00. And I thought, wow, that was really ingenious, a Taekwondo guy in a phone booth. But I personally wouldn't want to be that close to somebody in that range, trying to defend myself. And I'm not taking anything away from Mr. Parker. That guy's a genius. Mr. Dimmick just talks about how awesome and phenomenal he was. And I used to always stop by and say hi to him and, ask him questions. And, sometimes he would look at me in disgust. Sometimes he would kind of like, okay, you're on to something. He would offer me advice. And then I remember one time I said something to him, and he actually stopped and he looked at me and he had to think about it for a minute. And I was kind of proud of myself. And then I followed up with another question that was stupid, and he rolled his eyes. But he was always very nice to me. The first time I actually talked to him, he was dragging at the internationals. There was a bucket full of sodas and ice, and he was dragging it. And I came up behind him and I grabbed the other end of it to help him. And he didn't see me come up on him. And when he looked at me real quick, I had my hand parrying my face. And he had that real big, bright smile that he has. So, he was kind of impressed with that. But, I never realized that he knew people's names, and he knew you, all you had to do was be introduced to him one time. He knew who you were, who you trained with, what rank, all of that.
That's awesome.
So he got a little frustrated with me because I kept reintroducing myself every time. I do it twice. So you get a little frustrated. But no, like I said, I don't mean that to sound any way derogatory towards Mr. Parker or anything he's done. So it was just to point out some, things to think about.
Yeah, I don't think it was a negative at all. So what do you think, this is a question I was going to ask earlier and we dovetailed into some other stuff, so I'm bringing it back now. So what do you think are or what do you see as the characteristics that distinguish the three shields method of Kenpo from some of the other lineages?
I think it was just the fighting aspects of the hands. You can go offensive or defensive. Most of what I see, we've talked about Kenpo being technique-based. Well, when you're technique-based, that pretty much makes you have to be in the defensive mode. The three shields, if you're in freestyle mode, again, free to use your style, you're able to throw fakes, feign, reposition in a way that allows them to come down a predetermined path that you've already set. Well, it doesn't really matter if you've already thought the concept out ahead of time, what path they take, they're all dead ends. So you kind of narrow the response, and it's like that analogy Mr. Parker's saying about playing pool, that it's not just about knocking the ball in the pocket, it's about aligning your next shot so you can follow up and have multiple success and strikes, and obviously the person that can do that or has that ability is going to come out ahead. You stand toe to toe with somebody, any person, whatever their skill level is, can land a lucky punch. So I'm not real comfortable staying in that, touchy zone, within the 3 feet and then just exchanging blows. I learned a lot when I was in law enforcement and working as at a May company as a security loss prevention. When you go up to arrest somebody, you're basically the person that's attacking them. You're placing hands on them to facilitate arrest, to put handcuffs on them. So you better really know what it is that you're doing and what their counters are, and put yourself in a position that kind of limits the response. Otherwise, you're going to get tagged, because you're in a department store and you walk up to somebody and tell them they're under arrest, and they just look at you and say, you're not a cop. And then you pull out that little tin badge and say, well, I'm the security agent of the store. They're going to fight you every time. So I learned a lot about that. And, people don't like to be touched, but law enforcement, when you facilitate arrests, you have to place hands on people. So that's another aspect that most people don't consider. I'm always defensive. I'm never offensive. And I think once a lot of people can make that adjustment, it's going to really just open up so many possibilities to them with their Kenpo, that they're just going to be blown away by what they're going to be able to accomplish.
That's great. And like I said, there's not a whole lot of information out on the net regarding, the three shield lineage. So I'm personally just really curious about it. So thank you very much for sharing that. I really do appreciate it.
No problem. Was there something about that I didn't answer that maybe I take for granted that I know or that he taught me?
I think my question was just basically it was a general, lineage base, because I'm just not familiar with a whole lot of the three shields method. So I appreciate, starting to clear up some stuff.
Well, back in the old days, he was started in the 1956, when they were sparring, they used to do that old style with their hands down by their side, one hand cocked down, the other hand low. Well, Mr. Dimmick had played a lot of basketball, and he was thinking, well, they always tell you to kind of keep your hands up. So instead of having my hand down at the side, I'm going to keep it up in a vertical, and then have my other hand here, and then I can block. And then he just kind of would try things. And back in those days, they didn't have freestyle techniques. So he would invent some things, and he would come up with some ideas, and he had some good success with it. And that one thing led to another and led to another. So this was something that he was always teaching. And like he said, he gives Mr. Parker full credit for everything he ever did. It wasn't like he was going against the grade or I'm doing something better or different. It's nothing like that at all. It was just, this is how I learned how to defend myself from what Mr. Parker was teaching him. Because Mr. Parker, is such a genius in everything that he did. And, a lot of people don't realize that. And it's easy to criticize and critique somebody, that's been gone for almost 30 years, without them, still being here. And I'm sure the amount of times Mr. Parker changed up Kenpo, that its present day form wouldn't be anywhere like it is today in its final form. You know, a lot of people say, well, this is what Mr. Parker taught me, and that's great. And I'm going to teach this till the day I die, and I totally understand that, and I respect that. But I've done some things, and I say, wow, that doesn't work. You know, I've had some firsthand experience, and a lot of people have, expressed the theories. You know, I've had some reality checks that let me realize, wow, if I keep doing that, I'm going to die. Like one of my other things I told you about the mass attacks, of course I got to experience that, but the other thing I was kind of partial to was weapons defenses, because I have a tendency to get stabbed a lot. And
just friendly advice that may not be a career path you want to associate with going forward.
Well, a lot of people say, oh, you're a GrandMaster, or you're this, or you're that. Like I said, I prefer Richard. And I don't. Well, you think you're an expert, or you think you know this, or you think you know that? It's like, the only thing I claim is to be as an expert in what not to do. And the only way I've gotten to this amount of time and made it this far was just luck and my teachings, and that I was able to adjust and change up. That's the whole thing, that you have to be able to do that. But I was teaching knife defenses, how to disarm. When I was down in San Diego, I had a buddy of mine that used to be a Navy SEAL, and he would tell me that wake up on Coronado Beach and early in the morning, the SEAL training, they like to come out at that time frame, and they would let you participate with them in their hand-to-hand training, because they always like to have fresh meat, and they like to see what they could use to adapt and change up in what works and what doesn't. And it's always nice, instead of beating up on your buddies, to beat up on some unsuspecting member of the public. So we get invited to have weapons training or hand-to-hand or whatever the thing would be. And I, from the jiu-jitsu, and I had also trained in Aikido, I had some knowledge about the wrist locks and things. And so I always had some success in disarming people. And, I was able to take their weapons away from them. And, we practiced in the surf and things at that time. And I learned a lot of things from them. And, they would ask me some things. And, they were real good at holding their breath. So, I might be able to walk them out and hold them in the water for 5 minutes before they tap out. But, they would release the knife. So that led into other teachings of law enforcement, and teaching the Marines up to 29 palms before their deployment about weapon disarms. So that was just something that I put a lot of focus in. And when I was teaching at the time, I had been up to face the knife 8 times, and I had been stabbed 3. And one time I lucked out and I had a stab-proof vest on. So, I go to teach a class about what I've learned. And, that might be good Hall of Fame average, for baseball or something. But, if you get stabbed that many times and you're teaching a knife defense class, people go, wow, you suck. But I survived it, so it's like, hey, this is what I learned. And, when you take a normal class and you tell your instructor or something, hey, I did this and I got stabbed, what do you think their normal response is?
Well, is this really going to work?
Well, it's like, well, you did the technique wrong, right?
Oh yeah, that too.
So it's like, okay, well, you did the technique wrong. Well, getting stabbed, that's the wrong time to find out you're doing something wrong. So, through my years, I had been stabbed, like I said, 4 times. And then I went to Mr. Dimmick, and I was concerned about it. And, I asked him, I said, well, what am I doing wrong? And he said the most profound thing to me, and that just changed my life. And, he goes, well, you tell me what you're doing wrong. You've been stabbed more times than I have. It was like, oh, I just started laughing. It was like, wow, there's the answer. I've never thought about that. So I said, well, I did this and did that. And he goes, well, what if you did this? And then, he would offer his advice, and then, we kind of developed into something. And, so then I started teaching, and then I got into these other things. And during that riot, people were coming at me with weapons and whatever. So, I went from one-on-one to multiple attacks with weapons. And, the strategies, once I changed up and once I figured out what I was doing wrong, the first 4 times I got stabbed or slashed, and then it gradually built up to 13. So, I gradually started to incorporate what he had suggested and what I had come up with. And, since that time I was pretty fortunate, but, it's like anything else, you're thinking all this empty hand stuff. I finally at the end, I said, the 13th and the last time I faced a blade, I said, screw all this empty hand bullshit. So I just shot the guy. And that seemed to work the best. So, my advice about weapons is never, ever be unarmed. It's great that you're training empty hands, but, nothing beats a weapon.
Yeah, there's a video out there. I think it's Dan Inosanto that's actually the one on the video, but it was a training series for law enforcement, and I don't have the link on me off the top of my head, but you can find it if you Google it on YouTube. But it's the 21-foot rule, and every single time, Danny is just all over every single one of those guys that's trying to get their firearm out to do anything about it. So, being alert and being aware of what's going on is number one, but then number two is make sure you can get your stuff if you need it.
Well, that's a law enforcement tactic. You take 2 hands to grab your pistol. I was always taught, the hands are working independently. You got your right hand. Why do you have to go to your gun first? Why don't you just deal with the threat off angle? You never see anybody attacking anybody with the blade, and that's the secret I learned. You don't do defense on a knife. You attack the blade, and you get past them. And then if you have a weapon, then deploy it, then use it. And people, they pull out a knife on you, and then you pull out a knife on them, and you just start smiling at them. That makes a big difference in their psychological makeup and profile. All of a sudden, they're not as brave as they used to be. Guns you can still get in because it takes some effort to bring the gun up, unless you're one of those John Wayne types that wear it on your hip and the hammer's already cocked and, you already have one chambered and you got the quick draw holster. Then that's a different story. But, weapon, never ever find yourself empty-handed with a weapon. Make sure you're always armed. And that's a simple advice on that. That's free. So take it or leave it. It doesn't matter to me. I survived mine. I still have my bragging scars.
Let's switch over to a little fun subject for a little bit here on the end. Tell us about your Harleys.
Well, my wife has the Road King Classic, and I have a Fat Boy. I have one of those super rare 2003 100th anniversary Fat Boys that they only made 20 million of. So, yeah, she's the one that got me riding. So, been enjoying it ever since.
Yeah, just about every post I see you put up on Facebook for something is you riding or you and her riding.
Yeah, well, she got tired of me riding, bitch behind her and screaming at her. So she told me, you need a man up to get your own. It's kind of like, well, at the time it was like, I didn't want to tell my mother because my mom was pretty terrifying growing up. I didn't want to have to deal with that. So the thought of her, and then she also talked me into getting tattooed and stuff. So my wife used to be in the military, so she made a man out of me.
There's nothing quite like being on a motorcycle, is there?
Yeah, it's just that freedom, and like I said, it's so much fun not being in a cage. But I got to admit, when you hit a butterfly at 80 miles an hour, that shit hurt. I'm trying not to cry, and it's like, ow. Like I've never been hit that hard in class, or I've never been contemplating a punch in the face that hard. But that little butterfly, boy, they almost knock you off the back of the bike.
So my buddy and I had we went through a down on 46 between 101 and I-5 in California. There's a big long orchard in a couple of different places, and for whatever reason, we're stupid enough that every year that we decided to take that big long ride, it was always during season, and we came back and our helmets and the front end of the bike is just bugs everywhere.
Yeah, you learn not to open your mouth or smile.
Yeah, I haven't taken one in the face yet, but I have taken them in the face mask every now and then.
Yeah, and it's you get I had a suicidal bird. I was right in Texas, and had one of those big crows, and he was circling me, and it was that long stretch of I-10 between El Paso and Fort Stockton, and he was circling me, and all of a sudden he lined me up, and he came right at me, and luckily, I had wussed out earlier and got a face shield. And a bird hit the side of it at 80 miles an hour. So, that could have ruined my day.
Or at least your good looks, right?
I don't know about good looks, opinion. But, I was kind of happy with the way my mug is. I kind of look like John. They call me Uncle Buck because I kind of resemble John Candy, but I look like a pissed off John Candy all the time.
That's great. Yeah.
Was there anything that you wanted to know that I hadn't answered about the 3 shields, or?
I didn't have anything specific about it, just because, like I said, there's not a whole lot of information out there. So it was more just, let's start the conversation on it. I'm not going to lie. My ultimate goal would be I'd love to actually talk to Mr. Dimmick himself. So, I'm hoping I can make that happen at some point. We'll see. But if not, I've already talked to Howard, and I got a chance to talk to you about it. So we've at least uncovered a little bit more about 3 shields for the rest of the world. So there we go.
Well, a lot of his original fighters were more, they were into the tournament scenes. And, like I said, I always admired him and wanted to be that way. But, time restraints, I didn't get weekends off and didn't really get a lot of chance to participate in that. But, I do have a lot of trophies that I've recovered from people that didn't think highly of me to hurt me. So I have like a little trophy case of that. And I think one of my prized possessions is I have a ponytail that I ripped off somebody's head to try to stab me. And my wife was okay with it at first, but then I had a portion of the scalp that was still attached, and it was attracting ants, so she made me take that part of it off, but I saw the ponytail.
That's an interesting set of trophies.
I have a lot of shanks. I think I sent you a picture of those.
I wasn't sure exactly what that picture was, but yeah, okay, now it makes sense.
Yeah, well, a lot of people, they come at you with a knife or something, and it's like, well, no, okay, it's a knife. But for some reason, an inmate coming at you with a piece of sharpened metal, it was a lot more terrifying, I guess, because you realize that their intent is sincere and they do want to hurt you with it, not to mention the fact of what they normally dip them in before they try and stab you.
Yeah, not fun stuff.
Yeah, they're real fond of dipping them in feces and, trying to get you with that, so it enhances the wound and makes it infected, or get you hepatitis or all sorts of things. And, that's something a lot of people don't consider when they do techniques. You got to watch out for the bloodborne pathogens. You can, do your little mini form on them, or you can come in and turn into a Kenpo Cuisinart with you, if you have a blade. But, you might get them, but 6 months later they'll get you.
Right.
With hepatitis, HIV, or whatever. So,
yeah, all not fun.
Yeah, so a lot of people don't consider those things. So you need to. That's my thing. I try to let people know that it's not what you necessarily see in the studio. You need to expand a little bit. And it's like you can have the greatest teacher in the world, but if you want to truly learn the martial arts, you need to investigate the process yourself. When you're in school, college, or whatever, and you had to write a research paper, did the teacher write your research paper for you, or did they do the research and then tell you the answers, or did they tell you to go do it yourself? So a lot of it's self-discovery.
Completely agree.
So
good times. All right. I had a lot of fun with this particular interview. We've spoken a few times on Facebook back and forth, but have not had a chance to meet in person yet. So I learned a lot of really cool things. I've seen your name floating around the interwebs for quite some time now, and I'm really, really glad we got a chance to get on the phone and talk. Mr. Post, I really enjoyed having you here.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you for being interested. And listen to what I have to say. My wife gets tired of hearing my stories, so...
Well, now they're going to be out there forever, so yay. This is the part of the show where I like to turn it over to you guys, to our guests, and if there's any stories you want to tell, if there's any positive messages you'd like to send out to everybody who's listening, here's your moment. Microphone is yours, sir.
Well, if you have questions or anything, feel free to ask. I'm more than happy to share with what I know. I don't charge anything. I always think information that's going to save your life is invaluable. You can't put a price tag on that. And I owe Mr. Joe Dimmick everything. He saved my life so many times. I couldn't begin, to thank him. He's not only my instructor, my teacher. He's my family, father figure, big brother, crazy uncle. Any tag you want to put on him, he's more than met that. So, as far as, I try not to be too cliche with the, this is a way of life for me. I do it 24/7, 365, because you never know who you're going to run into. I meet a lot of people I used to know from work, and some of them, are still not particularly fond of me. I know everybody finds that hard to believe. So, but I was just saying, keep up with your training. Question it. Don't take it for granted that it works just because somebody told you it worked. Go out. I've always been that kind of guy. I don't believe anything, and I don't teach anything that I don't believe in, that I haven't used, tried, or analyzed for myself. If you are a technique person and you believe in techniques, then by all means do techniques. But my suggestion would be learn how to defeat those techniques. And then that way you can adjust accordingly, so you can figure out what's what. What you're doing wrong, or or you're vulnerable at a specific angle. And I always try to find a way to do it faster, quicker, easier, simpler. And my suggestion would be try and do that, because you never know when you're going to need this. And a lot of people have used it more than me. A lot of people haven't used it. A lot of people have more experience because they've been in combat. And then they come in at a white belt, and people don't think they have anything to offer. I don't care what your rank is. If you got the experience, I'll listen to you. I want to hear what works and what doesn't, and proceed from there. So, Mr. Dimmick had a phrase he always liked to say: the better the act, the more effective the attack. And pretty much that means, if somebody pulls a knife or a gun on you and they expect you to be scared, show them fear. That's what they expect. They like that. When, the inmates are going to do something, they want to see that you're afraid, and then they make the mistake, and you lead them down that path of destruction, and we regain the initiative. And like I said, we can go on and on and on about theories and concepts and principles and whatnot, but I just enjoy talking about it. It's one of my favorite subjects to do. So I think that's pretty much, I think I finally ran out of something to say.
Good deal. Okay. So if people want to contact you, how would you prefer them to get a hold of you?
They can get me on Facebook, or they can contact me through your website, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. If I usually give out in my closing stuff after, when I'm done with my editing and whatnot, I'll give out our contact information and everything. So if I get any inquiries for Mr. Post, I will be glad to forward them over. No problem.
I appreciate that very much, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Likewise. All righty, sir. We'll go ahead and sign off for the day. Very much appreciate having you on the show, and I'm glad I made a new friend in the process.
Me too. Thank you for having me, and sorry I haven't gotten to meet you in person yet, but well.
Maybe I'll see you on a ride. Who knows?
Definitely.
All right. Rubber side down.
Okay. Have a great day.
All right. Talk to you later.
Bye.
That was a lot of fun talking with GrandMaster Post. We'd never gotten to really have any significant conversation before we jumped on the phone to record this show, but it felt like I've known him for a long time by the end of the interview. He's down to earth, and he's a really genuine dude. I'm stoked to hear more about the history of Three Shields / Senpai Kenpo under the Joe Dimmick lineage, as there really isn't much out on the interwebs about him. But everyone I've talked to that personally knows Mr. Dimmick has spoken of him with great respect for his skills and knowledge. Hopefully we can get him on the show someday too. Thank you so much, GrandMaster Post. I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person. I'm working on a special guest for next week's show. I can't reveal who it is yet, but if everything comes together, we've got another guest who has decades of experience and a host of accolades on his resume. So hopefully we can tune in next week and see who we've got. If you like what you're hearing so far with these episodes, share that positivity. like ripples in a pond. Tell someone you think might enjoy it. Share the links around. It's all about getting the messages out where people can choose to listen to them and learn. So find us at artistofmotion.com. You can subscribe on iTunes at artistofmotion.com/iTunes and leave us a rating and a comment or two. And you got artistofmotion.com/Google Play. That's all one word, and that'll take you to our Android for Google Play Shop. And again, leave us a rating and a comment or two. We're on Facebook at Artists of Motion. You can email pod@artistofmotion.com. That's it for episode number 16, people. I'm Steve Zelazowski. We'll catch you next time on the Artist of Motion podcast.